And obstructive sleep apnea is when we stop breathing during sleep. That's not just due to the anatomy of the airway. It is, of course, made worse with mouth breathing, because when the mouth is open, the tongue is not able to rest in the roof of the mouth. When the mouth is open, the lower jaw, the mandible is falling back into the airway. The tongue is falling into the airway narrows. But also when the mouth is open, we breathe up our chest. When we breathe up our chest, the upper airway is more liable to collapse. And when we breathe through an open mouth, we take this cold, dry air into the mouth, into the throat, which in turn is contributing to inflammation. So here we have a condition, obstructive sleep apnea, that is pretty common. And it hugely affects mental health. There's no question the relationship between depression and obstructive sleep apnea. Yet I can imagine that many people listening to this who may know people with depression, those people are tired, they are irritable, and they have cognitive difficulties, but their psychotherapist will very often put their state of mind due to their depression, and their psychotherapist isn't necessarily asking about their sleep. So we also know that 75% of the anxiety and panic disorder population have dysfunctional breathing. So it's not just that stressful situation that's changing our breathing patterns, but our breathing pattern is feeding back into that stress. So, this is where breathing comes in. And yeah, it's about looking at that connection, that three-way connection. So if I was asked about softness of life or focus, your ability to hold your attention, your ability to have some degree of what's going on in the mind, because ultimately that does determine our happiness. This mind and this veil of thinking that we're constantly looking through, and we interpret everything that happens in our life through this veil of thought. And then we have to ask the question, well, how can we influence this? Breathing is one way, because you can improve or you can reduce blood flow to the brain. You can increase or decrease oxygen delivery to the brain. And most people are not even aware of that. But also, if you've got poor breathing, you're more likely to have poor sleep. If you have poor sleep, you're talking about ADD. I'll give you one study. Karen Bonnock did a paper. She looked at 11,000 English kids or children in England in Stratford-upon-Avon, and she looked at them from age 6 months to 57 months. And she tracked their behavioral sleep problems and sleep disorder breathing. Children who at age 5 had sleep issues, such as snoring, apnea, that they may stop breathing during sleep, and mouth breathing, those hallmark symptoms. Children at age 5 who were untreated had a 40% increased risk of special education needs by age 8.
40%?
40%. And
wow.
The reason being is because when we are asleep, whether we are a child or an adult, we need to get slow wave sleep. We need to get really deep sleep, because during deep sleep is when, in childhood, the brain is developing. So, and also, of course, in childhood and adulthood, we have what's called lymphatic drainage, that the brain cleans itself during, and deep sleep periods are crucial. But if we are stopping breathing or snoring, for example, and no child should snore, absolutely no child should snore, because snoring implies there's a resistance to breathing, which in turn is going to affect blood oxygen saturation, which is also going to take that child out of the deep sleep. So the child now has got constant sleep disruptions, constant sleep fragmentation. That's affecting their brain development. So now if we look at mental health then in the population, we often have to wonder, well, how many of these children have been deprived of sleep quality? Mouth breathing is a factor there. And of course, it's not just for children, but that paper is published in Pediatrics. For anybody who wants to look at it, just put in Karen Bonnock, Bonnuck, a longitudinal study involving 11,000 British kids, published in a high-ranking medical journal, and nobody seems to know about it, because no parents are aware of the negative effect, well, very few, of mouth breathing in children. And yet, none of this is new. Like 1872, there was a term called adenoid faces. And if you go into Google and you put in adenoid faces, you see a typical facial profile of a mouth breather. The face is longer, the lower jaws are set back, the maxilla, the top jaw is set back, the nostrils are pinched, and the teeth are overcrowded. And then if we ask, well, what's happening now in the dental industry? Well, overcrowding of teeth is so common. But what does that tell us? If a child has overcrowding of teeth, there's a bigger story there. It's not just that the teeth are crowded. This isn't just about the aesthetics. This is about the function. The jaw isn't small enough. The jaws aren't, not that they're not small enough. The jaws aren't big enough to house all of the teeth. That's why the teeth are overcrowded. So why aren't the jaws big enough? Well, the jaws are not big enough because of maybe maybe the mom wasn't able to breastfeed, the food that we're eating as children, the exposure to different allergens and our body's reaction to them, the habit of mouth breathing, tongue sucking. So there's a lot going on there, which in turn is affecting craniofacial development. So their shape of the face is changing, the airways are getting smaller. This is more then conducive to sleep disorders. Child then has sleep disorders, then it's affecting their mental health. And if you go to an orthodontist then at 12 years of age or 13 years of age, very often the orthodontist will say, we need to remove 2 or 4 teeth. But if you extract teeth then, what that will do is make the jaws even smaller again. And now there's not even enough room for the tongue. And if the tongue isn't able to stay in the roof of the mouth, the tongue is going to fall back into the throat. So you can see the disciplines, and this is coming back to the simple habit of mouth breathing. Mouth breathing is not normal in human beings. The physiological normal way to breathe is in and out through the nose. And I will go one step further then. I had surgery on my nose in 1994. Nobody told me to breathe through it. I continued to having the same sleep issues and fast upper chest breathing and narrowing of the airways, which were made worse by mouth breathing. No question about it. So it's not enough to treat the nose. We have tens of thousands of children in this country will undergo adenoidectomy and tonsillectomy. We know from the literature, from Dr. Christian Guilleminault, there's a 65% worsening in their sleep within 3 years unless these children are taught to breathe through their nose. They are not being taught to breathe through the nose. We also know that the adenoids and tonsils are not just there for the fun of it. There was a study conducted in Denmark in 2017 looking at 1 million individuals and looking at individuals who had their adenoids and tonsils removed, and those people who did have their adenoids and tonsils removed, they had an increased risk of respiratory conditions then for the rest of their life. We also know, and this is the gold standard of treatment of sleep issues in this country and in the Western world, is to remove the adenoids and tonsils, that the efficacy of it was first explored in 2010, published in the American Journal of Respiratory and Critical Care Medicine. They looked at 578 children, and the conclusion was that only 27% of those children had their sleep apnea cured post-surgery. 73% continued to have sleep apnea post-surgery. Now, that's just children. If we look at sleep in the adult world, the gold standard of treatment is a CPAP, so it's continuous positive airway pressure. It was invented by Dr. Colin O'Sullivan, and he took the idea from a vacuum cleaner. A vacuum cleaner sucks air, so this is a vacuum cleaner in reverse. It's pumping air either in through your nose or mouth or both or whatever. If you have a full face mask, it's going down your throat, it splints open the airway. So the gold standard of treatment here is that 50% of people have to abandon after 3 to 6 months. 50% of those people who are diagnosed.